Okay.
Thank you for coming and taking this interview with Blog Pulse 360. Could we just begin with your name and what you do?
Sure. My name is Joshua Ashley Keyman. I co-chair Morrison and Foerster's Global Blockchain and Smart Contracts Group, and I also chair the legal working group of the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance.
Excellent. And how did you get into the blockchain industry?
I got into it in a strange way, perhaps a little bit differently from those who've been enthusiasts from the beginning. I had been representing investment banks in leveraged finance transactions, and I started hearing some of the investment banks and seeing in the media that there was talk about these things called smart contracts. And at the same time, people were being quoted as saying, and we're going to reduce legal spend. So my antenna went up and said, what? Right? Because I was thinking, oh my goodness, my job, like what is going on? I better get ahead of this. We better get ahead of this or we're going to end up falling behind. So I started looking into what is a smart contract. And this led me to, well, what is a blockchain? And then that led me to, okay, well, why did blockchain get started? And that led me to Bitcoin, which I had heard about Bitcoin before, but it had no immediate relevance, I thought, to my life or my practice. So I fell in love with blockchain along the way.
Did you have any technical background that drew you to the blockchain, or was it simply that business-driven, I want to learn about this because it seems to be where things are going?
I wouldn't say that I have a technical background. I will say that when I was in college in the last millennium, I was fascinated by complexity and the study of complex systems. So back when I used to know math and used to use math, I did have a great interest in those types of spaces and also in game theory. And so this seemed to be a very interesting marriage of things that had excited me greatly when I was much younger.
So how did your career change once you entered into this industry?
Well, I used to do a lot of work, a lot of thinking, but I had no life of the mind, basically. It was a lot of deal after deal after deal, knowing what is market, things like that. And when I started, along with a colleague named Steve Bleiberg, I started our blockchain and smart contracts group at Morrison and Foerster. We really pushed it along, right? Because there was some resistance in the beginning, like, what is this? And we started it as a task force. Now, roughly all of my work is in the blockchain and crypto space. So that's a significant shift. And I will say I have quite the life of the mind thinking about this stuff.
So you mentioned smart contracts, and that's where you're going. There's been a lot of debate over whether smart contracts really are smart, whether they really are contracts. What's your opinion on the issue?
I think we have to look at each of them, right? I mean, a smart contract is at its base a computer code, right? So whether something's a contract or not under law, I mean, we have hundreds of years of law that determines whether something's a contract. You know, was there an offer? Was there an acceptance? Was there consideration, et cetera? Right? So I don't think you can just say, yes, every smart contract is a contract, right? Because no, it might just be a string of computer code. The question as to whether smart contracts are smart, well, as some have noted elsewhere, you know, they're really only as smart as their code, I suppose, on one hand, right? You have to make sure the code is valid. But also, they're only as smart as their inputs. So they use if-then logic to be self-executing. So if this occurs, then this happens. Well, the input of the if that's wrong, then you could have something that automatically executes, and it's very dumb, right? But I think, as I frequently say, many of the parts of the contract right now that exist, you know, governing law, indemnity, things involving judgment, or gray areas, I don't think those should be translated to computer code just yet. I think we're fine with the natural language contract, and then having a very simple automated execution for things that are just logically related, you know, if this, then that.
So you said that you got into it because your antenna went up. Still concerned or happy that you got into it?
Oh, I'm thrilled. I love this area. I love not only the intellectual challenges and puzzles, but I love the people. Like the clients and even my so-called competitors at other firms are really, they've become my some of my best friends, because we need each other, right? We're trying, none of us wants to be the outlier giving bad advice. We're trying to socialize things and trying to kind of build our knowledge ladder together so that we can basically climb it together, rather than me trying to figure out something in a corner, somebody else doing something else. So it's very collaborative. It is amazing to look at areas of the law that you think are settled, and then to see them in a new light, and to be able to think creatively about them.
And so where do you think that smart contracts are going? What's the future for smart contracts?
Well, I think smart contracts, on their own, I'm not sure where they're going by themselves, but with the interaction of blockchain, and blockchain technology and data oracles, and being able to, once we have information in blockchain or in a blockchain, in many blockchains, right, being able to do things with that data. So an example that sometimes has been given is, you missed your flight, and I'll say today I had some crazy flight issues. But one of the use cases is flight insurance. So you miss your flight, and rather than having to submit a claim, something like that, if the passenger manifesto or whatever it's called, if it shows that you're not there, you'll automatically get the payment. I think there are so many things that we'll be able to do with smart contracts. Right now, though, I see them mostly in operation during token sales, basically, when people are selling tokens, altcoins, and they're receiving Bitcoin or Ether or something like that.
So you find that the biggest advantage of smart contracts then is that facility of being able to do the if-then conditional statement, or are there any other aspects of it that you find beneficial?
I do think that the if-then is important. One of the advantages that I also see is that if you're doing a large-scale set of transactions, okay, if you and I have a contract, maybe we'll take the time to write it out, we'll negotiate it, things like that. But if I'm transacting with all these people across the world, it's a lot easier to have a take it or leave it. Here you go. You either enter into it or you don't. And that can be very helpful just in terms of efficiency, frankly. I also think that there are lots of opportunities where manual errors come into play. I guess I shouldn't call them opportunities, they're more like challenges. But things where people have made errors, including, say, releasing financing statements that they shouldn't have. So with UCC1 financing statements, as I've talked about separately, financing statements, if you look at them, they're just one page. They're really simple documents, but they do such an important job. They actually perfect a security interest in personal property in the US, and you file them typically in the jurisdiction of organization, or if it's a foreign entity, you would file it in DC. And perfection is important because that is also putting on notice other creditors. Well, there have been instances, including the GM bankruptcy, where people inadvertently filed the wrong statement, or they released something that should not have been released. So some people think that by doing things through smart contracts and kind of being careful about what the inputs are, that you don't have those manual errors. Or, for example, say I have a financing statement and I've perfected my security interest in all of your assets, or at least all of your personal property, but then you grant the same stuff to somebody else. If I could get an alert saying, hey, guess what? Even though in your agreement he said he wouldn't grant any security interests to anyone else, he did. I think there are a lot of interesting things that you can do once you have a system where you have information on a blockchain and you have different contracts interacting together.
I think that is